Good evening. Thank you for tuning into Now This daily live fact check of President Trump's coronavirus task force briefings. My name is Alan Piper. I'm the senior politics producer. I am supported today by our whole newsroom. We are all working from our respective homes. It's been a beautiful spring day here in New York City, the global epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. It is the sort of spring day where you would like to go outside and you would like to enjoy the company of your friends, but we can't escape the fact that in our city alone there are more than 135,000 cases of COVID-19, and we have suffered over 13,000 deaths. The U.S. has added more than 30,000 new cases since yesterday. The current death toll in the U.S. is over 41,000. That's nearly 10 times the death toll of the Iraq War. Some 3,000 Americans have died of COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. That is more than were killed in the 9/11 attacks. We seem to be experiencing the equivalent of a September 11th attack every day. So while we are waiting on the president, we'd like to try to answer some of your questions, so please type them in the comments. Again, if you're just joining us, I'm Alan Piper, and you're watching Now This daily live fact check of the president's coronavirus briefings. Today is Orthodox Easter. Easter's promise of life conquering death is particularly poignant at this moment of global crisis. This is a sacred time for many of the world's major faiths. Passover ended this week, and next week begins the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. President Trump infused yesterday's briefing with some dangerous Islamophobic conspiracy theories. He suggested that Democrats would allow mosques to remain open while closing down churches. This is false and baseless. He suggested that Christians are unfairly discriminated against in America. This is also without basis in fact. Again, if you're just joining us, I'm Alan Piper, and this is Now This live daily fact check of the president's briefings. We are expecting the president at any moment, and this could be another fiery briefing. This past week, we have seen increasingly temperamental behavior from the president in these briefings. On Monday, he declared that as president, his authority is, quote, total, and he suggested he could force governors to reopen states against their wills. For the record, this is false. On Tuesday, he announced that he is cutting off funds to the World Health Organization in the middle of the greatest world health emergency in a century. On Wednesday, he threatened to adjourn Congress and govern the nation on his own. On Thursday, he rolled out his plans to reopen the states, even though governors and health experts say that we're not doing enough testing to do this safely. On Friday, he unleashed a series of tweets that were widely seen as inciting violence in states with Democratic governors. He urged anti-social distance protesters, whom I guess we could refer to as pro-coronavirus protesters, to, quote, liberate those states. And then today he's been lashing out again on Twitter, calling Speaker Pelosi, quote, dumb, and even attacking Fox News for allowing her on the air. Also today, he urged supporters to tune into an online service of the anti-LGBTQ Prestonwood Baptist Church in Plano, Texas. So that's where we are today. If you're just joining us, I'm Alan Piper, and this is our live daily fact check of President Trump's coronavirus briefing. All of us at Now This are self-isolating and working from home. I'm broadcasting from my apartment in the East Village, so please forgive me for any technical difficulties. We would normally have the support of an entire physical studio, but I'm relying on my local internet provider. So if the signal suddenly drops out, or if I get Zoom bombed by one of my cats again, I apologize in advance. Now, again, we are expecting the president at any moment. In the meantime, we're going to try to answer some of your questions. So please type away in the comments. I've got one already. Let's see. All right, so Ahmed asks, is remdesivir showing good results and likely to be approved for treatment? And the answer is that remdesivir is in clinical trials, according to the CDC. It has shown promise in the past, but antivirals haven't shown much effectiveness in treating COVID as of yet. A reminder, there still is no cure, there is no confirmed treatment, and there's not yet a vaccine. But health experts around the world are working at the fastest possible pace to try to rectify that. So thank you, Ahmed, for your question. Again, please type your questions in the comments, and we will answer as many of them as we can before the president comes out. If you're just joining us, I'm Alan Piper, now this senior politics producer. This is our live fact check of President Trump's daily coronavirus briefings. So on Friday, that was the day that Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said that everyone would receive COVID relief payments. A lot of people have gotten them, but a lot still have not. President Trump also promised that you'd be able to track the progress of your payment on the IRS website, but we've been receiving multiple reports that people who try this are getting an error message. If you usually get money back from the IRS via direct deposit, that's how you should be getting this payment. It's $1,200 for most middle to low income Americans. It is going directly into your bank account if you use direct deposit to get your tax refund from the IRS in most years. Now, direct deposit is great if you have a bank account. Unfortunately, roughly 15 million Americans don't. Low-income workers who are most in need of relief are the least likely to have bank accounts, and as a result, they'll have to wait the longest for these checks. The IRS says it could take until September to get them all out. And at least a few extra days have been added because President Trump reportedly insisted on having his name printed on the checks. So you'll have to wait a little bit longer, but on the bright side, you will have a beautiful, tremendous, wonderfully printed name of the president on your checks. So again, if you're just joining us, I am Alan Piper, the senior politics producer for Now This. I have the support of our whole team working remotely to fact-check today's coronavirus briefing. We are expecting the president at any moment, so in the meantime, we're going to take your questions and just type them in the comments. Maureen asks, what exactly happened in Florida this weekend, and what could be the consequences? Okay, well, Maureen, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida opened some of the state's public beaches this weekend, just days after the state reported its single highest one-day death toll on Tuesday. On Tuesday, 72 people died in a single 24-hour period. DeSantis has been under fire for not taking the state's response to the pandemic seriously and seems to be taking his cues directly from President Trump and the White House. The editorial board of the Miami Herald has condemned his response. There are roughly 26,000 coronavirus cases in Florida. At least 764 Floridians have died. The state is under particularly high risk because of the large number of senior citizens who live there. So that is the latest news. To clarify, my understanding is that he's allowing local officials to actually, I'm seeking more information there on that. But while I'm seeking that information, I've got a question from Eric. He asks, how much did the White House donate to the World Health Organization, and how much did Trump claim? All right, so President Trump has been claiming that the U.S. Contributes over $500 million to the World Health Organization. That's a little misleading. So there is an assessed amount of payments that every country contributes, and then there are voluntary payments on top of that. Our annual contributions of both assessed and voluntary are regularly less than the president is claiming, less than the $500 million. And as of March 31st, we were already roughly behind in our committed contributions by close to $200 million. It is an unprecedented move for a president to cut off funding to the World Health Organization in the midst of a world health crisis. Democrats say the president cannot legally do this. The power of the purse rests with Congress. The president cannot stop funds that Congress has allocated. It is, in fact, because of this, in part, that the president was impeached, because he was found to have illegally stopped funds from reaching Ukraine that had been allocated by Congress. So that is what's going on there. If you're just joining us, this is our live daily fact check of President Trump's coronavirus task force briefings. I'm Alan Piper. We are expecting the president at any moment. While we are waiting, please keep typing your questions in the comments. I'd also like to walk through the timeline a little bit, because the president keeps trying to revise the timeline of what we've seen. So, bullet points of the timeline. Yesterday, the president said that what he'd inherited from the Obama administration was, quote, garbage. What the Obama administration did was, in 2014, establish a global health security unit within the White House National Security Council. The idea was that this group of national security experts would be on the lookout for threats like a global pandemic. The Obama administration also prepared a 69-page pandemic response playbook, basically a recipe saying, if you see this, you should do this so that Americans are not at risk. Now, during the transition period, Obama's National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, says that she personally warned President Trump's team that the Obama National Security team believed that a pandemic was one of the biggest potential threats facing the United States. It's important to remember that when President Trump repeatedly says no one could have seen this coming. Obama's team did see this coming. She says that she personally handed off the playbook to make sure that they would have it. They did not act upon it. Now, in the beginning of the Trump presidency, we have reporting from The Nation, which says that the Pentagon flagged that there was a potential shortage of masks, hospital beds, ventilators, and other equipment should there be a nationwide epidemic. And the Pentagon advised that the president begin in 2017 increasing these supplies. The president did not act on that advice. In 2018, he actually fired the Global Health Security Unit that President Obama had put in place. He has since denied doing that, but as recently as this February, he acknowledged it and said that it was a cost-cutting measure because he doesn't like to pay for things that he's not using. Also, he declined to renew CDC epidemic prevention funding, which forced it to downsize in 39 countries, including China. Now, according to ABC, the first intelligence warnings came to the White House in November that there seemed to be a new health threat emerging from China. That was in November 2019. Reuters reports that the White House National Security Council was briefed again on December 31st. On January 8th, the CDC issued its first warning. On January 9th, President Trump held a rally. Also on January 9th, the World Health Organization reported that the mysterious pneumonia-like illness in China was a novel coronavirus, the same type of pathogen that had caused the SARS epidemic in 29 countries in 2002 and 2003. So President Trump is lately blaming the World Health Organization for not acting fast enough. Let's not forget the first warnings from the World Health Organization came on January 9th. The president did not take action on that day. He instead held a rally. On January 10th, the World Health Organization issued a comprehensive package of testing guidance with advice to all countries for how to detect, test, and manage potential cases. On January 14th, President Trump held a rally. On January 18th, the Washington Post reports that Secretary Azar of Health and Human Services tried to have an urgent call with the president about the crisis. President Trump reportedly cut him off to berate him about his handling of an attempt to ban flavored vaping products. President Trump then hung up the phone and went golfing. January 19th, he went golfing again. January 20th is a key date for this history because that was the first official diagnosis of a case of the coronavirus in the U.S. It was also the first official diagnosis in South Korea. Now, watch how South Korea's response differs from the United States response. South Korea immediately begins putting together a plan for nationwide testing. The United States does not. 2 days later, when asked whether he was worried, President Trump said, quote, "No, not at all." He said, quote, "We have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China. It's going to be just fine." By the way, I would advise you not to put papers in your mouth as that White House correspondent just did. Just don't go putting things in your mouth that you don't have to. It's really ill-advised. So, January 23rd, the situation in China had gotten so bad that China shut down the entire city of Wuhan. This was a remarkable occurrence. The World Health Organization held an international news conference confirming a basic picture of the virus that holds up reasonably well today, saying that a novel coronavirus spreading person to person, more transmissible than the seasonal flu and 40 times deadlier, with an estimated fatality rate of 4%, was what we were looking at. Now, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer was sufficiently alarmed by that to immediately call for a public health emergency. President Trump did not enact one. On January 27th, Joe Biden wrote an op-ed warning that President Trump was not taking this threat seriously enough and urging immediate nationwide action. This is a period of time when we could have been putting testing into place. We could have been building ventilators. We could have been refilling our national stockpile of medical supplies. But we did not. January 28th, Elizabeth Warren, still a presidential candidate at that time, released her plan on how to confront the coronavirus. That night, President Trump held a rally. Only the next day, on January 29th, did President Trump order a task force to begin taking on this possible threat of the coronavirus. The formation of this task force seems to have followed a memo from his trade advisor, Peter Navarro, who warned, quote, "The lack of immune protection or an existing cure or vaccine would leave Americans defenseless in the case of a full-blown coronavirus outbreak on U.S. soil." He went on to say, "This lack of protection elevates the risk of the coronavirus evolving into a full-blown pandemic, imperiling the lives of millions of Americans." Roughly about this time, when the city of Wuhan was already closed down because it was in such a state of crisis, the State Department worked to bring home 6,000 Americans who had been in Wuhan, exposed to the virus, bring them home to the United States before there was, in the U.S., any widespread system of testing. January 30th, China expanded its lockdown to encompass all of the province of Hubei. The World Health Organization on January 30th declared a global health emergency. President Trump held a rally. It would be another 6 weeks before President Trump would declare a health emergency himself. It's important. He's going to say, most likely today, he's been saying that his response was faster and better than the World Health Organization. That is not supported by the facts of the actual timeline. In late January, we know that Health and Human Services requested $136 million for fighting the virus. The White House refused that request. February 1st, President Trump went golfing, while Vietnam was busy shutting down all flights from China. Only on February 2nd did a partial set of travel restrictions go into place on China. February 2nd, President Trump talks about his early ban on travel from China. It did not go into effect until February 2nd. This is weeks after the first case of coronavirus in the U.S., and it was not a ban on travel. U.S. citizens were continued to travel to and from China. Some 40,000 people, U.S. citizens and authorized travelers, arrived in the U.S. from China after these restrictions went into place. And in the previous month, there were at least 300,000 travelers from China who arrived in the U.S. So this really is an instance of that expression of closing the barn door after the horses have already left. President Trump's partial restrictions on travel from China likely came too late to have any real impact, but if they had any impact at all, the impact would be to slow down the progress of the virus in the U.S., not to stop it. And slowing it down would have only helped if he had taken action in the intervening time to make preparations for its ultimate arrival. I'm going to continue walking through this timeline to show you exactly how he did not. But first, I'm going to just answer a couple of your questions because they've been coming in. Ginny asks, can we get a list of businesses who've received the Paycheck Protection Plan loans? We can't provide a full list, but it's a good time to point out that many small businesses have been denied since the well has at least temporarily run dry. And while many small restaurants and businesses were denied, Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, a national chain, received $20 million. Chicago's Potbelly, a national chain, received $10 million thanks to a loophole that says that you are a small business if you have fewer than 500 employees per location. So Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, a nationwide chain, is technically a small business because they have fewer than 500 locations at each location. Fewer than 500 employees at each location. Chicago's Potbelly Sandwich. Again, that's a chain. It's a national chain. It is not what most people would consider a small business, but it is technically getting money from these small business payouts. I will say that I can fact check definitively that Potbelly sandwiches are irrationally delicious. There's no reason for a sandwich to be that good, and yet they are. Mora asks, when will Congress come back to work? After consulting public health officials, Congress decided to extend its recess until May 4th to avoid transmitting coronavirus and practice social distancing. The House and Senate will continue operating in a skeleton form until then. President Trump has accused Speaker Pelosi and others of being on vacation. They are not on vacation. They are continuing to work, but they are avoiding working in person to avoid the spread of the disease. The House is investigating changes to its rules that would enable it to vote remotely. Traditionally, votes can only be conducted from the floor of the House. Sarah asks, what about Social Security, disability, and stimulus checks? People who receive Social Security or Social Security disability payments, SSDI, will automatically receive stimulus payments even if they don't typically file tax returns. The IRS has said that people in these groups are expected to see the automatic $1,200 payments later this month. Recipients of Supplemental Security Income, SSI, will also automatically receive their payments. IRS officials expect those payments to be sent no later than early May. On Friday, the IRS announced that veterans and their beneficiaries who receive compensation and pension benefits from the Department of Veteran Affairs will also receive their payments automatically, though the timing on the payments is still being determined. It is important to note, however, that if you do not have a bank account, by definition, you cannot receive payment directly into your bank account. And there are some 15 million Americans who do not have bank accounts. They are disproportionately lower income Americans. Those who are more desperately in need of these payments, they will have to wait longer for physical checks. And as I mentioned earlier, the physical checks themselves have been delayed by at least a few extra days so that the president's signature can be printed on them. So again, if you're just joining us, my name is Alan Piper. I am the senior politics producer for Now This. I am taking your questions while we await the President of the United States. He appears to be running late. I will check his Twitter feed to see if I can find out what he has been up to. That is often the best way to figure out where the president is and what his mental state at any given moment is. I have no new updates. Tweets earlier today include attacks on Nervous Nancy, that is Speaker Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, one of the highest-ranking elected officials in the country. The president is on Twitter calling her, quote, dumb. So let's get back to the timeline. So we mentioned that it was not until February, nearly a month after the first public warnings from the CDC and the World Health Organization about this crisis, only then did the restrictions on travel from China come into effect. And at that point, there had already been some 300,000 travelers from China arriving in the U.S. over the previous month. On February 3rd, the World Health Organization released a strategic preparedness and response plan to help protect countries with weaker health systems. On February 5th, Secretary Azar tried again to get more money to address this crisis. He asked this time for $4 billion. The Washington Post reports that this led to a shouting match within the White House. On February 6th, the World Health Organization, whom President Trump is likely to attack again today, began distributing 250,000 tests around the world. The U.S. refused to accept any of the World Health Organization's tests, saying that we would develop our own. About that time, the CDC produced a total of 90 tests, which turned out to be faulty. On February 10th, President Trump proposed slashing the CDC's budget by an additional 16%. That same day, he said that the virus would likely go away on its own in April because of the heat. There are only 12 cases in the U.S. It is now April. There are now over 746,000 cases in the U.S. That night, he also held a rally. At the rally, he again floated the idea that this virus would go away on its own when the temperature got warmer in April. On February 15th, he went golfing. On February 19th, he went golfing. On February 20th, he held a rally. On the 21st, he held a rally. On the 23rd, trade advisor Peter Navarro sent another memo warning more urgently that the increasing probability of a full-blown COVID-19 pandemic could infect as many as 100 million Americans with a loss of life of as many as 1.2 million souls. Only the next day, February 24th, does President Trump finally ask Congress for additional funding. But on that same day, he tweeted, quote, "The coronavirus is very much under control in the USA. Stock market starting to look very good to me." On the 25th, he tweeted, CDC and my administration are doing a great job of handling coronavirus. And he said, I think that's a problem that's going to go away. They have studied it. They know very much. In fact, we're very close to a vaccine. That was February 25th. We are at present, at best, about a year away from a vaccine. The next day, February 26th, he said, quote, you treat this like the flu. The risk to the American people remains low. He bragged about the fact that there were only 15 cases in the U.S., and he said within a couple days it's going to be down close to zero. There were, at that point, actually 60 cases in the U.S. Again, today, in April, there are over 760,000 cases in the U.S. On February 27th, he said, quote, like a miracle, it's going to disappear. On February 28th, President Trump held a rally in which he criticized Democrats and the media for the way they reported on the coronavirus, and he called it, quote, their new hoax. A Democratic PAC has been running ads that include that clip of President Trump calling it their new hoax. This was on camera on February 28th. The president is trying to sue to stop this ad from airing on television. He has written cease and desist letters, but he did in fact say it. He called it their new hoax. That was on February 28th. The very next day was the first U.S. death from the coronavirus. That day, Washington State declared a state of emergency. Again, President Trump is going to highlight, he's going to say, as he has been saying, that he acted early. It was weeks after that that he finally enacted a state of emergency. On March 3rd, he said things are going very well. On March 3rd, he also said that he did not think that it was inevitable that this would spread across the country. Only on that day, on March 3rd, did the U.S. approve a plan for widespread testing. There still is not a plan in place for nationwide testing. On March 4th, he said in an interview with Fox News that it might be fine for people who have the disease to go to work with it because they'll just get better on their own. And he also said that day, later, that it was, quote, very much in hand. The following day, it was enough not in hand that California and Maryland both declared states of emergency. March 6th, Kentucky and Utah declared states of emergency. President Trump said on March 6th, I think we're doing a really good job in this country at keeping it down, a tremendous job at keeping it down. He visited his CDC while wearing a campaign cap, and he made the promise on March 6th, anybody right now and yesterday, anybody that needs a test gets a test. They're here, and the tests are beautiful. The tests are all perfect, like the letter was perfect. The transcription was perfect, right? This was not as perfect, but pretty good. It still is not true that Americans who want tests can get tests. Here in New York City, where in New York we are performing more tests than any other state in the nation. The New York area is performing roughly 25% of all the nation's tests. Even so, people in New York who want a test cannot get one. In fact, one of the largest hospitals in New York is no longer allowing doctors and nurses to be tested because the number of tests are in such short supply. March 7th, New York declared a state of emergency and Trump went golfing. March 8th, he went golfing again. March 9th, he again compared it to the flu and suggested that it would go away on its own. March 10th, he said, quote, it's really working out, it will go away. On March 11th, the World Health Organization increased the severity of the threat level, calling it a pandemic. Only on March 13th, 6 weeks after the World Health Organization declared an emergency, weeks after other states within the country had declared emergencies, months after his National Security Council had been warned, months after receiving memos from Peter Navarro, from Secretary Azar of Health and Human Services, only on March 13th did President Trump declare a national emergency. In a Rose Garden ceremony, he claimed that Google was building a website to help you find out if you have coronavirus. This apparently came as news to Google. This website still does not exist. That same day, he said that Walmart would be donating their parking lots and that at Walmart locations around the U.S. there would be drive-through testing sites. This still has not happened. Only on March 16th did he finally lay out a series of guidelines urging social distancing, advising people not to congregate in groups of 10 or more, urging Americans to wash their hands. A new report from one of the nation's leading health data modeling institutes now suggests that if President Trump had issued these guidelines as little as 2 weeks earlier, 90% of the deaths that we are expected to see could have been prevented. On the 16th, President Trump had a call with governors, and he told them that they were on their own. Respirators, ventilators, all of the equipment, he said, quote, try getting it yourselves. As a result, governors of both parties have complained that they have been in competition with each other. Governor Cuomo compared it to being on eBay with 50 states. It is not just Democratic governors, as President Trump likes to suggest. Republican governors also complained that they had to compete with other states, and as a result, the cost of supplies went up. Governor Cuomo talked about the cost of an N95 mask being increased 100 times to 100 times the normal cost just for a single N95 mask. As a result, hospitals across the nation ran into widespread shortages of masks, gowns, gloves, and here in New York City, we have reported on nurses wearing garbage bags in lieu of protective gowns because there simply was not enough equipment for them. And as a result, the CDC has now reported that at least 9,000 health workers have become sick with coronavirus. But the true number may in fact be much greater because, again, we do not have adequate testing. On March 17th, President Trump used the phrase pandemic for the first time to describe the crisis. And he told reporters, quote, I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic. That was on March 17th. I want to remind you that about a week earlier, he was still comparing this to the flu. On March 26th, the U.S. hit a grim milestone, exceeding any other nation in the number of coronavirus cases. Only on March 27th did President Trump claim that he was invoking the Defense Production Act, although it turned out that he still did not put in official requests to companies to begin producing equipment until later. It was in fact a voluntary action that GM began working to produce ventilators. But this was unfortunately tragically too late, and GM now reports that it will not be able to fulfill the number of ventilators that it has been asked for until the end of August. On March 29th, President Trump acknowledged for the first time that the deaths from the coronavirus could be as high as 200,000 Americans. And moments after acknowledging that, he bragged about the ratings of his press conferences, saying that they were getting greater ratings than Monday Night Football or The Bachelor finale. Within a few days, he upped the number, saying that 240,000 deaths would still be considered a great victory. That would be equal to roughly 4 Vietnam Wars. To date, there have been, in the U.S., 41,000 deaths from the coronavirus. That is more than the death toll of all U.S. military actions since Vietnam. In fact, it is nearly 10 times the death toll of the Iraq War. So that's the truth about the timeline that the president keeps trying to rewrite. We are expecting the president of the United States at any moment. He is roughly half an hour late at this point. My name is Alan Piper. I am the senior politics producer for Now This, and we're broadcasting live our daily fact check of President Trump's coronavirus task force briefings. While we are waiting for the president, who should be here any minute, we are going to answer as many of your questions as we can, so please type them in the comments. Beverly asks, so the stimulus checks were just $1,200 and one time for Americans, that's it? That is what was approved, a one-time stimulus for Americans who qualified. Although 2 Democratic members of Congress, Ro Khanna of California and Tim Ryan of Ohio, have proposed monthly checks for Americans who qualify for the next 6 to 12 months until the economy is better and unemployment goes back down. But for now, it is checks of $1,200. That is for most middle to low income Americans. Upper income Americans receive a little less than that. And if your individual income is over $95,000, you receive nothing. On the bright side, your individual income is over $95,000. It is important to note that there is no geographic difference on these payments. So here in New York, a struggling New Yorker gets a $1,200 payment, which does not cover the rent on a one-bedroom apartment almost anywhere in the city. In Mitch McConnell's Kentucky, a struggling Kentuckian will receive $1,200, which is enough to pay a month's rent on a 3-bedroom house. The allotment of funds has not been based on need either. Governor Cuomo has highlighted the fact that in states like Wyoming, governors are getting roughly $300,000 per coronavirus patient to treat them, while in New York, we've been getting roughly $12,000 per coronavirus patient. Matilda asks, why did they wait until 644 people were infected at the pork processing plant, and have they issued a shelter-in-place order in that state yet? That is a reference to South Dakota, where 644 people got sick in one of the nation's largest pork processing plants. Over a third of the positive coronavirus cases in South Dakota come from Smithfield Foods in Sioux Falls. Governor Kristi Noem has refused to issue any sort of stay-at-home order in the state, saying that South Dakota, quote, is not New York City, and our sense of personal responsibility, our resiliency, and our already sparse population density puts us in a great position to manage this virus. I want to highlight that, yes, South Dakota is not New York. And while New York's rate of infection is decreasing, South Dakota's is rapidly increasing. Its number of cases shot up over 250% in the last week. Rance asks, what was the purpose of the tweet mentioning several states regarding their Second Amendment being in jeopardy? This is a reference to a number of reckless tweets, I think it's fair to call them that the president sent out saying, liberate. He urged his supporters to liberate Michigan, liberate Minnesota, liberate Virginia. Virginia's explicitly referenced an assault, he said, on the Second Amendment. The fact is, Virginia has passed some common sense gun regulation this week, which was signed into law, I believe, on the anniversary of Virginia's horrific Virginia Tech shooting. I'll tell you what was in the Virginia gun law. President Trump falsely claims that Virginia's governor is trying to take away guns from law-abiding Virginians. This is simply not true. Here is what is in the bill. Universal background checks. It's not a radical idea. It's supported by 92% of Americans across party lines, including a majority of gun owners. He signed into law a red flag order. Again, the majority of Americans support red flag laws. Also included in the reforms was a limit on purchases that stops Virginians from buying more than one handgun a month. So you can buy as many as 12 handguns a year in Virginia under this law. I don't know why you'd need those, but you can still buy those. They aren't being taken away from you. You just can't purchase a massive stockpile of handguns in a single month, according to this law. There's also a fine for parents who leave their guns out where their children can get at them. Again, this is not taking away guns from responsible citizens. It's not even taking the guns away from the irresponsible citizens who leave their guns out where their children can get at them. It's just imposing a fine, which would be a small price to pay to reduce the number of children who kill themselves accidentally through the use of guns. And then finally, Virginia put in place a requirement saying that if your gun is stolen, you have to let the police know. If your gun is stolen, by definition, that is a gun falling into the wrong hands. The law is just saying, let the police know. Let the police know that there's one more gun in the hands of a criminal. It's not a radical thing. Virginia's not taking anybody's guns away. And the President of the United States is urging citizens of Virginia, gun enthusiasts, to, quote, put the governor of Virginia, quote, under siege. That is very harsh language, and in fact, a mob of angry gun-toting citizens assembled outside of the governor's home. That should be alarming to anyone. So we have seen the first members of the President's coronavirus task force arriving, so the President should arrive shortly. We see Admiral Girard of the Uniformed Public Health Service, Stephen Hahn of the FDA, and Seema Verma, the administrator of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. I want to point out they are seated directly next to each other. They are not demonstrating social distancing as people are advised to do. It is very striking that while governors are enacting practices to protect themselves, their staffs, and journalists in their briefings, the President of the United States has declined to do that. It is striking that the President and Vice President of the United States are consistently in close physical contact with each other in the midst of this health crisis. And in fact, at a recent briefing, the two of them stood inches apart from the Secretary of State. That is an alarming proximity of leadership in this time of what should be social distancing. Again, if you're just joining us, we are expecting the President of the United States at any moment, and when he arrives, we will be fact-checking his briefing live. I'm Alan Piper, the senior politics producer for Now This, and I am supported by our entire newsroom, everyone working remotely. I am broadcasting from my home in New York's East Village, where I am frequently interrupted during these briefings by small cats. If one appears on screen, I apologize if you find that unsettling. Vivian asks, has the U.S. really done more testing than any other country? Yes, but it is misleading. The fact of the matter is the U.S. is very late in implementing testing. We are currently have done the largest raw number of tests, but in terms of testing per capita, we are 42nd in the world. This has been the real, probably the biggest disaster of this entire episode has been our testing. I want to highlight that in January, before Germany had experienced a single instance of the coronavirus, scientists in Berlin were actively working on a test. The World Health Organization began distributing tests in February, roughly 250,000, at the time that the CDC had only produced 90 tests, which turned out to be faulty. Now here comes the President of the United States.
Thank you very much.
So we will attempt to fact-check him in real time.
I'd like to begin by saying that we're continuing to negotiate with the Democrats to get our great workers and small businesses all over the country taken care of. I think we're getting close to a deal. Could happen. Could happen. A lot of good work has been going on, and we could have an answer tomorrow. And we're going to see what exactly does take place. We're also looking at...
The president is referring to efforts to extend the Paycheck Protection Program, which is a series of forgivable loans to small businesses. The president has frequently misrepresented the state of negotiations on this. He had requested an additional $250 billion after the program began to run out of money. Democrats support that extension, but insist that it be paired with additional funding for hospitals and state and local governments and funds aimed specifically at minority-owned and rural small businesses. Mitch McConnell and Republicans opposed those additions and opted to instead let the funding run out entirely, opting that it was better for no one to get the money than for hospitals and states to get the money. The National Governors Association, governors of both parties, have called for more payments to the states, saying that it is desperately needed and that states cannot begin to think of reopening until there is more funding to support their efforts to curb the epidemic and to expand testing.
We've done more testing than all of these countries combined: France, United Kingdom, South Korea, Japan, Singapore, India, Austria, and Australia.
Again, as we said a moment ago, that is misleading. The U.S. has done more testing, but the U.S. is woefully behind in testing per capita, ranking about 42nd in the world in terms of testing. The U.S. Specifically is remarkably behind South Korea. South Korea had its first case of the coronavirus on the same day as the U.S. and implemented widespread testing 2 weeks later. We are instead months later and still do not have a nationwide plan for testing in place. And the fallout from that could not be more striking. South Korea has had 232 deaths, whereas we have had 41,000 deaths. Given the difference in population size, we should expect the U.S. death rate to be about 6 times that of South Korea. Instead, it is 176 times, and that is tragic and directly connected to the delay in testing.
Aren't that aware of, but they're there, and they're really high-quality machines, by the way. And the potential capacity of those machines if they're fully utilized. A couple of them didn't know that they could be utilized in a different manner. They were only up to 10%, and they can go 90% more. Many governors are still relying on their state laboratories rather than the full and much larger capacity that is available to them. As an example, commercial laboratories such as Quest and LabCorp, these are massive laboratories that can handle a lot more than they're being sent. A few days ago it was at 30%. They're only at 30% capacity now. I don't know, they're probably the same, but they have a lot of capacity. In addition, academic laboratories, big research labs, there's tremendous capacity out there. And some of them want the fast, the instant Abbott machine, which just came about due to the research during this little short period of time, and it's very quick. But
the president has several times suggested that governors are not availing themselves of the full ability of testing. CNN looked into this yesterday and said there is no evidence that any governor is deliberately not using available testing capacity.
Anybody like to see what it looks like? Should I open it? Does everybody? Open it up. I will. I will. This is what it's about, right? Does it remind you of something? It reminds you of this, right? One's a swab, one's a Q-tip. It's actually different. It's very sophisticated, actually, but it's a little bit like, so this is the swab. And we've ordered a lot of them. They have a lot of them. Some of them, some of the states, they were shipped to states, and the states don't know where they are.
This is not a true claim. President Trump has repeatedly claimed that governors are losing supplies that are getting to them. He's also claimed that doctors and nurses are stealing them. There is no evidence to support this. Now, many labs and scientists are pushing back on the claim that they are testing under capacity, and they're saying that specifically it is the absence of swabs like that that is hindering them from being able to perform these tests. President Trump had previously suggested that these swabs are no more sophisticated than Q-tips. They are, in fact, not cotton swabs. They are synthetic polymer. And let's see what this newspaper headline's all about.
Trump rewrites the book on emergencies. That's what's happened, too. And we just read one paragraph. He's given pride of place to federalism and private enterprise, lauding the patriotism and proficiency of our fantastic governors and mayors, meaning I do call them fantastic when it's appropriate, and our incredible business leaders and genius companies. I guess I probably use those terms.
So the president is using this coronavirus task force briefing, this briefing that is billed as an update on the state of this crisis in the U.S. that has killed more than 41,000 Americans. He is using this briefing to read aloud a flattering article in a newspaper.
Once it was reluctantly aroused. It was hard to get it aroused, and it is hard to get it aroused, but we got it aroused. When asked why he has not issued orders for nationwide home and business lockdowns, he has emphasized that the intensity of the epidemic varies widely and is best met by calibrated state and local judgments. That's the judgments of governors and local people. And added pointedly that such steps would conflict with the Constitution. But very importantly, he's just a very respected gentleman. To see this was a very nice feeling. Not for me necessarily, but for all of the people that have worked with us. I mean, they've worked so hard, and we've developed tests that are so fantastic. We've come up with things that nobody had ever heard of, and we did it during this pandemic. We did it under pressure.
Well, several things here. For starters, there was part of the problem is that we are developing our testing during instead of before. As I mentioned earlier, President Obama had put in place a global health security unit within the National Security Council, which would have been the people to sound the alarm on this much earlier. President Trump fired them. He discarded the 69-page pandemic response playbook. And while Germany was working on developing tests long before there was a single case of the coronavirus in their country, the U.S. is months into this, still working to come up with a testing plan.
So are going to be using, and we're preparing to use, the Defense Production Act to increase swab production in one U.S. facility by over 20 million additional swabs per month. We've had a little difficulty with one, so we're going to call in, as we have in the past, as you know, we're calling in the Defense Production Act, and we'll be getting swabs.
So the president has been startlingly slow in using the Defense Production Act. This would have enabled him to demand companies produce this equipment earlier when it was needed. President Trump was very reluctant to do so, although, as the New York Times has reported, he has invoked the Defense Production Act hundreds of thousands of times in his presidency to get things that he wanted for the military. He held off in doing it until basically the end of March, and still has not fully called upon U.S. manufacturing to produce the items that are needed. And we are having, as a result, massive shortages of medical supplies at hospitals around the country.
Meeting virtually every day, and it's a great team, right? It's a great team. They've been doing a great job, Mike. You've been doing a great job. Many governors are doing this incredible work, and they're working with us very closely on testing and working in their states. And again, it should be a local thing because it's all these points within a state. But we're helping them a lot, and we want to help them a lot. We're going to help them more than a lot, actually, if you think about it, with what we've done. Think of it, we've done more than all those countries combined. We're encouraged.
Again, the president is misleading when he says that we've done more than all those other countries combined. There is a reason why we are behind all the other countries. We were slower to act, and as a result, the U.S. now accounts for 31% of the world's cases of coronavirus and a quarter of all the deaths.
Believe in it less strongly, but still it's a very good thing to have. I think we can say that. Some people believe in it like they can't exist without testing, and other people don't believe in it nearly as much. They can see how they're doing, and they feel how they're doing, and they've been pretty vocal about that. I think you know pretty much who I'm talking about, but I believe if they want it, we should give it to them and get it for them and work with them. You must remember that the governors wanted to have total control over the opening of their states, but now they want to have us, the federal government, do the testing. And again, testing is local. You can't have it both ways. Testing is a local thing, and it's very important. It's great, but it's a local thing, and
this is just not true. The nations that have successfully contained this have had a nationwide system for testing. There are many reasons why this can't be localized. One of them is the difficulty of getting the equipment. As Governor Cuomo has said, he can't negotiate an international supply chain. The federal government needs to step in and perform this function. That is the sort of thing for which a federal government exists.
And that's much tougher when you have to build these machines. We built thousands of machines. We'll more than help the governors, and we'll make sure that everything goes well, just like it did with ventilators, just frankly like it did with face masks, on a much easier subject. As face masks, again, everything's easier than a ventilator. Ventilators are tough. But now, I spoke yesterday with the president of Mexico and with various other countries. We're going to be helping them with ventilators. We have tremendous numbers of
So the president is saying multiple misleading things here. For starters, he's suggesting that with the situation with masks has been resolved. I can tell you it is not true. There is still a shortage of masks in hospitals around the country, particularly here in New York, and it is putting our health workers at risk. The CDC, as I mentioned earlier, has found that at least 9,000 health workers have become sick because of this disease. At least 2 nurses here in New York have died from it.
scourge plague, call it. It's got many different names. In many of the hotspots, including a 50% decline over a 9-day period in New York City. That's a fantastic decline. It's a beautiful thing to see after going through the opposite. We continue to see improvement with declining trajectory of cases in Seattle, Detroit, New Orleans, Indianapolis, and Houston metro areas.
So the president is either being misleading or misunderstanding when he talks about cases declining. What we are seeing is a decline in the rate of new cases, but unfortunately the number of cases continues to rise. And we have added in the U.S. 30,000 new cases since yesterday.
100 years ago has anything like this happened. And in those days, they had no real communication, so you couldn't say, go inside, don't, people just died. Almost 100 million people, it's reported.
The president is talking about the flu epidemic of 1917 and 18. He just said that there was no form of communication back then. That is not true. There was telegraph and radio and newspapers. And also the number of people killed was not 100 million. It is about half that, according to the CDC.
For things that we've been talking about ad nauseum for so long. And they get it. They get it. In some places, the governors are ready to go, and other places, they can't go yet, and they won't go. They have to have it safe. I want it to be safe, too. It has to be safe. And again, I have to say this. I can't emphasize it strongly enough. I'm probably going to show you charts of some of the countries that are really having trouble. And one in particular is having a massive problem where they said, let's go. We're just going to keep going. Well, they're the lines that we're famous for now. Some are flat and some are up. This is like a rocket ship. This country is, and they decided, let's go and let's wing it. It's, they thought it was okay, but it's a problem. It's a big problem. And there's another couple. There's one in particular that everybody thinks did it, but the people are staying in. Okay, the head of a country doesn't have to say stay in. These people are smart people. They know what's going on. They see what's going on. So they don't have to say. They can say they're not doing that, but the people are staying inside. There are not a lot of people outside sitting at cafes, despite what the mode of a country is. But if you look at Europe, most countries have done this. A couple tried not to. Italy tried not to, and they held it. And Spain tried not to.
So the president is trying to spin that his response has been better than other countries. I want to highlight again that the U.S. has more cases than any other country. In fact, the U.S. has more cases than the next 4 countries combined. As I mentioned earlier, the U.S. accounts for 31% of all the world's cases and 25% of the deaths.
I think, and really over the last couple of weeks, from the time we did it, shortly thereafter, I said we made the right decision in closing down, made the right decision on borders, banning people coming in from China, banning ultimately people coming in from Europe.
Now, again, it was not a ban. There were wide loopholes. Some 40,000 people arrived from China after the travel restriction went into effect, and it likely went into effect too late to have been effective anyway, because there had been 300,000 travelers from China over the previous month.
To 35, 40, 50 sometimes. It's over a long period of time, much different. It's even a much different death, to be honest. It's a much different death. This is violent. CMS is finalizing new guidelines for doctors and patients to resume elective surgeries. It's a big thing. A lot of hospitals were closed. They couldn't do any elective surgeries. They'll be able to start doing that. Procedures and medical care that needs to be done in person. As long as the rate of infections remains low in a community, we want patients to be able to go to their doctors, get clinically tested, and have work done, surgeries, receive treatment for chronic conditions, and resume preventative care. So we'll be allowing that to happen very soon. We had no capacity in the hospitals with what happened with the plague We had no capacity to do it. If your doctor believes you need a treatment in person, you can get a treatment now. You can and should get a treatment now. We are asking that healthcare facilities have plans in place to keep patients safe during their visits. Some places like New York, New Jersey, where they really got hit hard, it's going to be a little bit tougher. They've done a great job, but they really were a center. I mean, they were a center. I was watching that. It was incredible. But now they're leveling off, and I think they'll be coming down very soon. Administrator Seema Verma will be telling you a little bit more about it. Mike's going to say a few words. Seema will then speak, tell you a little bit more about that. My administration continues to execute our massive military operation to supply our hospitals with equipment they need and beds if necessary, but it looks like we're totally covered on beds. We have plenty of beds. It's highly unlikely. That would be bad news if we needed more beds, but it looks like it's going just the opposite direction. I want to thank Governor Cuomo, the relationship there for this whole thing. We're building hospitals. It was very good. We built a little bit more than we needed, and that's good, as opposed to building a little bit less. That's not good. But he's worked very well with us. The governor of Louisiana has been great on the bed, on that whole situation with the beds. Frankly.
Now, President Trump doesn't seem to be able to decide how he feels about Governor Cuomo. Yesterday he was tweeting that it was, quote, ridiculous, the amount of equipment that the governor had asked for to confront the 200,000 plus cases of coronavirus in this state.
And I could name probably 6 other locations. I'll tell you one. California was fantastic. He was really good. He was really good. And I appreciate the fact that he said what he wanted to say, and he was.
So the president just said that there is no shortage of beds at this point. That does not appear to be the case. In Chicago, in Westchester, New York, in Philadelphia, there appear to be current bed shortages for accommodating the number of patients needed.
Ventilators through new production or purchases, with thousands already delivered. We've delivered thousands of brand new ventilators all throughout the country. New York would be, I guess, the biggest user.
Now, the New York Times reported that thousands of the ventilators that the federal government delivered arrived broken, and there are still shortages in many states.
Exceed by a lot total expected demand. Governor Cuomo said today that no one who needed a ventilator was denied a ventilator. That's a beautiful statement. I appreciate it. And all governors are in that same position. We do have a clip that I thought would be appropriate to put up today. It'll take 2 minutes, and I think you'll find it interesting, but we appreciate it. And let's see if we can do that. You'll turn out the lights, and we'll see if we can do that. Thank you.
So the president is going to play a video clip. He has had peculiar use of video clips. Let's hear what this is.
No sound?
We bent the curve. We flattened the curve.
He's a good-looking guy.
Government did it, people did it, but government facilitates people's actions, right? We had to double the hospital capacity in New York State. That's what all the experts said. President brought in the Army Corps of Engineers. They built 2,500 beds at Javits that Michael and Northwell were operating. It was a phenomenal accomplishment. Close to 1,000 people have gone through Javits. Luckily, we didn't need the 2,500 beds, but all the projections said we did need it, and more, by the way. So these were just extraordinary efforts and acts of mobilization. And the federal government stepped up and was a great partner. And I'm the first one to say it. We needed help, and they were there. State and local governments were fantastic. The hospital system was fantastic. New Yorkers were fantastic. And that is an undeniable fact. Just to look at what they said was going to happen. CDC, Coronavirus Task Force, Cornell, McKinsey, all of them. And they had a line up here, and the actual line is down here. What do you owe the variance to? Heroic efforts on behalf of people as facilitated by government, federal and state.
So the president is playing selective clips from a Cuomo press conference, seemingly to highlight the successes of his response. It is worth noting that he is not playing the many, many clips over the past few weeks of Governor Cuomo talking about the lack of supplies that were here and the fact that he is bidding against 49 other governors for equipment because of the federal government's failure to adequately lead in this time of crisis. He is highlighting that the role of FEMA in rapidly building the facilities in the Javits Center and the USNS Comfort were successful. But that is far from suggesting that Governor Cuomo is saying that the federal government's response has been successful overall. And Governor Cuomo continues to highlight the fact that New York does not have enough equipment available to perform the tests that would be needed to reopen the state.
It's okay, whatever. But he said some really good things, and that's it. It makes people feel good. It's actually the Wall Street Journal. Christopher was saying, I want to make people feel good too. I want to make, when they're doing a good job, I want to make people feel good. I want the Admiral to feel good. He's worked so hard. Mike has worked so hard.
So President Trump says that he wants to make people feel good at these briefings. It is true. Governor Cuomo has made people feel good at his briefings. Governor Cuomo's briefings have been wildly popular. People have been drawn to the fact that there is a structure to the briefings. They always begin with new and pertinent information, followed by an update of recent information, followed by guidance as to how New Yorkers should act, and usually are summed up with a personal statement, some empathetic statement of trying to relate to New Yorkers and how they are going through this crisis. It's also important to note that Governor Cuomo stands 6 feet away from any other person on the stand. The president's briefings could not be more different. He has been yelling at journalists. He yesterday called President Obama's legacy garbage. He has been attacking the governors of other states. So it is certainly true that President Trump's briefings have been less of a feel-good experience than Governor Cuomo's.
The areas with the greatest need when they're not in use, and we right now have almost 10,000 in our reserve. We've been able to give away thousands, like we helped Andrew, or we helped Phil in New Jersey is doing a great job. Andrew would tell you that too. They have a very good relationship working together and working with us. But we have, now we're back up to almost 10,000, and this is after giving away tens of thousands of ventilators. And we're going to fill up the reserves of states. We're going to work with them so in case this happens again. But we're also going to help other countries. I was telling you, the president of Mexico, we're going to be sending a pretty large quantity to Mexico. They very much need them, and to other countries where they need them. I've had about 6 calls with leaders of other countries, and they need them. They're hard to get done. Our companies stepped up, and they did an incredible job. Some of them were automobile companies, and they take an assembly line, and they'd say, guess what? We're making ventilators now for a while. But because of the historic steps that we've taken, I remain confident that every American who needs any of this equipment, any of the things we're talking about, will either have it now, already has it, or will shortly have it. Through the Project Airbridge, we've completed 64 flights.
So the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation estimates that there will be a nationwide shortage of ICU beds of 16,000 over the next several weeks.
Team of military people and young geniuses. Some are older geniuses, but mostly younger geniuses, I think I can say. Some are people that made vast amounts of money in Silicon Valley. And, you know, these are very smart people. The job they've done is incredible. And I said, where do you come from? Well, I sold my company, sir. Oh, really? How much did you get? I think he said $700 million. I said, that's good. You want to work for the government? No, I want to help our country, sir. And it's tremendous brain power. It's a beautiful thing to see. Young.
I'm going to try to find out whom he might be referring to, but I want to reveal one of President Trump's tells is that when he tells a story and quotes someone saying, sir, it is frequently a false story.
But FEMA's working to commit another $384 million to produce another 64 million gowns for healthcare. These are the highest quality, where they're very safe. When you put them on, they're safe. Very important. The quality of the gown is very important. It's people in different places, different countries, they're wearing gowns with cuts in them, and these are very safe. I want to thank America's textile manufacturers for their partnership in this remarkable undertaking. 2 U.S. companies, Hanes and Standard Textile, are on track to produce 5 million gowns by the end of the month.
So this is good news, but this also highlights the fact that this could have been done sooner. Governors were calling upon President Trump to invoke the Defense Production Act. Governor Cuomo, for instance, specifically said over a month ago that, about a month and a half ago, that all apparel makers should be called upon by the president to make these masks and gowns that are needed. Had the president gone and acted on that, there would not have been nurses wearing garbage bags at hospitals in New York.
Honeywell is hiring more than 1,000 American workers to produce 20 million masks per month. 20 million masks a month. Thanks to the Defense Production Act, we'll be receiving another 40 million masks over the next few weeks. And I also want to thank 3M, because they really stepped up. We had a little dispute at the beginning, but that got worked out quickly, and they've been doing a great job, 3M. They really have been. I want to thank their great CEO. We had a little skirmish, but it worked out well. And they're doing a lot of work right now on masks and other things. This production...
This late invocation of the Defense Production Act to now, only now, start producing these masks feels a lot like the scenario where a guy takes his girlfriend out on a fancy date a week after having forgotten her anniversary. It's just that sort of, it is good that it's happening, but it is just too late to have helped the people who needed it much earlier.
And I always wondered, why aren't they sterilizing these masks? Some of them are pretty sophisticated masks, and some you can't because of the material, others you can. But we have actually 2 companies that do this, but one company I know very well in Ohio, and they're doing a great job. So they're sterilizing masks. Up to 20 times you can sterilize a certain type of mask.
So this sterilization of masks so that masks that were intended for single use can be reused is a good step, but it is highlighting the fact that there is a shortage of masks. And these masks are not usually so costly. Governor Cuomo has talked about the fact that because he has been bidding against other states to try to get this equipment, he has seen the price of these masks go up to over 100 times their usual cost.
In a year, think of that, over a couple of weeks. Moreover, we're bringing supply chains back home, and we've learned a lot about supply chains. We've learned that it's nice to make things in the U.S. I've been saying that for a long time. One of the reasons I ran for office, because we started making things everywhere but here. And if one thing comes out of this, more than anything else, it's that we should make product in the United States. And these supply chains, they sound wonderful. But if one country has a problem, the whole chain is ruined. And I've been saying it for a long time. I ran partially on that. I ran on that, and I ran very strongly against China. And then we made a great trade deal where they buy $250 billion. They're supposed to. And they're paying tariffs. They paid us tens of billions of dollars. I've given...
Okay, this is one of President Trump's most frequent falsehoods. He says that China is paying tariffs to us. I do not know. I honestly do not know if he is intentionally lying or if he has just a woeful misunderstanding of the most basic principles of Economics 101. I suppose it could be both, but tariffs are not paid by the other country. When President Trump says that China is paying these tariffs, that is a lie. China is not paying the tariff. The tariff is paid by the U.S. importer, and that cost is usually passed on to the U.S. consumer. The U.S. has not been taking in money from China as a result of Trump's trade war.
50. Now, of course, the virus came along, and I'm not happy. I'm not happy. I let them know I'm not happy. So, we had a great relationship we had a very bad relationship with China. Then we had a good relationship because we made a great deal.
So President Trump has been increasingly looking for other people to blame for this crisis. He has blamed the World Health Organization. He has blamed the Obama administration. He has blamed the individual governors. But lately the blame has been pointed most at China, and he keeps saying he's not happy with how China handled this. I want to highlight how he talked about China earlier. At the time that the World Health Organization was warning of these risks, Trump was praising China's response. And I'll just read one tweet for you. On the 24th, he said, China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency. It will all work out well. In particular, on behalf of the American people, I want to thank President Xi. So, and that is one of many statements that the president was making earlier. Now he is pretending that he was opposed to China's response all along, but it does not match his previous statements.
But if we've learned something, it's about supply chains. I just saw yesterday where when the auto industry gets back, they have a problem because there's a supply chain going through a different country. And this has been going on for years, for decades. I always said it was no good. Why do we make it? Why do you need a supply chain? Very simple, make your parts here. They get one part from this country, one part from that country. It's all over the place. The problem is if one country has a problem, you have no car or whatever it is you're making. So we've learned a good lesson. I think a lot of smart people knew that before. But we've distributed many hundreds of millions of masks. This pandemic has underscored the vital importance of reshoring our supply chains and bringing them back into the United States where they belong, where they should have never left. What happens if you're in a war and you have a supply chain where half of your supplies are given to you by other countries? Who are the people that thought of this? These are globalists. It doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work during rough times, bad times, or dangerous times. So we're going to continue to fight the virus. We're talking to China. We spoke to them a long time ago about going in. We want to go in. We want to see what's going on. And we weren't exactly invited, I can tell you that.
Again, he's saying that in January, late January, he was praising China for its transparency. Now he is claiming that he's wanted more transparency for a long time.
Get a step further. World Trade Organization, too. World Trade. We did years ago, many years ago. The World Trade Organization, from the day China came in, that's when China bloomed. They were mainlining it, and then boom, they were up like a rocket ship because...
That is not true. China was one of the world's most rapidly growing economies before it became a member of the World Trade Organization. That is why it was invited to become a member of the World Trade Organization.
China was a developing nation. They make the cars, they make the plant, they make everything. And they're a developing nation. So we've had I might have gotten elected to a certain extent because of China and other countries. One of my big things was trade. The United States is getting ripped off in trade. Now Japan is paying $40 billion and buying a lot. That's before we even do the deal.
So I want to highlight what it is when President Trump says we're being ripped off in trade. He's objecting to China charging us too little. The problem is that Chinese goods are cheap, and therefore we buy a lot of them, and our goods are comparatively more expensive, and so we buy more things from them than they buy from us. And the president says that this is us being ripped off. Have you ever gone to a store and complained that you were being ripped off because they were charging you too little?
Talk about the Democrats, and it was a statement made by Brett Baer, good guy, smart. On February 19th, there was a Democratic debate in Las Vegas. That was February 19th. That's way after I closed entrance from China.
Well, he didn't close entrance from China. He just placed some restrictions.
A Democratic debate in Las Vegas. 3 words weren't said during the debate: virus, coronavirus, or COVID-19. Those 3 words never came up. That was, I just thought it was a very interesting, because, you hear...
So President Trump is complaining that Democrats didn't mention coronavirus in a February 19th debate. He held a rally that night. I don't believe he mentioned the coronavirus in that rally that night, although I will check. Shelby, if you're able to look up whether President Trump named the coronavirus in his February 19th rally, I would be interested to know. He held rallies on February 20th, 21st, on the 25th, he said, on the 24th, he said that the coronavirus is very much under control. On the 25th, he said that we were very close to a vaccine. On the 26th, he said you treat this like the flu. On the 27th, he said it would disappear like a miracle. On a rally on the 28th, he called it their new hoax. And yet he is complaining that Democrats were not adequately focused on it on February 9th at the debate.
Really looking good. We call COVID treatment acceleration program. We're accelerating all of these great companies that are looking, and we have government agencies looking too, NIH. This extraordinary program is slashing red tape to speed and development anti-rival, and if you look at what we're doing in terms of the speed, it's unrivaled. It's totally unrivaled. There's never been anything like it. The FDA and Dr. Stephen Hahn, a highly respected man from a great institution, left that job to come here. The job he's doing is incredible. And we're working with Scott. His predecessor was terrific. We're working with a lot of people, but the speed of development for antiviral, antibody, and immune therapies is at a level that nobody thought even possible. And I will say this, we're getting very good results. It's a little soon yet, but if we could find the therapies that would solve the problem, if somebody has a problem, we can get it taken care of so it's not so devastating as it has been. With that, I'm going to ask Vice President Pence to come up, and I have to say it's a Sunday evening, and this man has not stopped. He's working. We all are, in all fairness, but he's been working with his task force and everyone else round the clock for months, and I just want to thank Mike. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me echo your words about all the dedicated men and women on the White House Coronavirus Task Force, and the team that you assembled in January, and some of whom are with us today.
Okay, so we were able to check. So President Trump just now suggested that it was a dereliction on the part of Democrats not to use the words coronavirus, flu, or COVID-19 at the Democratic debate on February 19th. That same night, he held a rally, and he also did not use the words coronavirus, flu, or COVID-19.
746,000 Americans have tested positive for the coronavirus. Unfortunately, more than 68,000 Americans have fully recovered, but sadly, more than 41,000 Americans have lost their lives to the coronavirus. And we all...
that is nearly 10 times the death toll from the Iraq War.
Who have loved ones that are struggling with this disease. Today, we've seen encouraging news, again, about our progress as a nation. President Trump reflected on those momentarily, but the coronavirus White House Task Force today learned that our large metro areas continue to stabilize and even see progress. The New York metro area, including New Jersey, New York, Long Island, Connecticut, and Rhode Island all appear to be past their peak. The Detroit metro area also appears to be past its peak and is stable. New Orleans metro area actually is the most.
By the way, President Trump made a point of highlighting that Vice President Pence has not stopped working and has been working day and night. Yesterday, he left Washington to deliver a commencement address to the U.S. Air Force Academy's graduating class. I suppose this is technically working, but this was not working with the coronavirus task force.
Boston Metro and the Philadelphia metropolitan area. The progress that we are making is a tribute to the American people. It's a tribute to state and local leaders in all of these areas and the partnership that our president has forged. But we just want to encourage every American, as we see this progress, to continue to heed your state and local authorities.
It is striking. He just said, we want to encourage everyone to heed your state and local authorities. President Trump on Friday tweeted encouraging his supporters to rebel against the guidance of the governors of Michigan, Minnesota, and Virginia.
We can consolidate the progress that we have made and help move our states toward reopening our country. We also received a report today, and the coronavirus task force, at this point, 5,528 military personnel have been deployed across 24 hospitals and facilities, and 28,700 National Guard are on duty. On the subject of supplies, the President spoke about this at length, but at the present moment, we have more than 9,055 ventilators on hand. We actually added 91 ventilators to that supply because of the production that the President and our task force at FEMA has activated. In the next 7 days, we'll be adding 576 ventilators to the strategic national stockpile.
Now, the Pentagon again urged President Trump to add to those numbers in 2017 to be prepared for an event like this. I do want to highlight, I don't have, unfortunately, the most recent numbers, but as of April 10th, New Jersey was saying that it needed 5,000 more ventilators than it had. Pennsylvania was saying that it needed 1,000 more, and Louisiana was saying that it needed 1,000 more. It seems unlikely that those gaps have been fully closed in that time.
Evaluate the President's guidelines for opening up America again, the criteria that we believe is appropriate and necessary before states can move into any phase one change in the mitigation strategies, but also at the President's direction tomorrow. We'll be providing all the nation's governors and all of their health officials with detail about the testing infrastructure that exists all around the country. We'll be specifically providing governors and state health officials with information about all of the lab capability that exists in their states, and also we'll be updating them on our efforts to identify the kind of supplies the President just held up and our efforts to make sure that those supplies are at all of those laboratories as the need should arise. Remember that a month ago we had done 80,000 coronavirus tests in America. This weekend we cleared more than 4 million, and we're currently testing more than 1 million Americans a week. We fully expect to actually have tested more than 5 million Americans before the end of this month. But at the President's urging, we're going to continue to scale that testing. And then
this does not seem to be accurate. Currently, we are testing roughly 150,000 people per week. Per day, 150,000 per day. Harvard estimates that we would need about 3 times that level of testing in order to be able to safely implement any opening up.
That have symptoms that may be coronavirus, and then also having the testing resources to deploy to vulnerable communities, nursing homes, or other vulnerable communities that we have identified as needing additional what is called monitoring.
He also said that we have performed over 4 million tests to date. The accurate numbers appear to be 3.7 million.
14 days of consistent declines and strong hospital capacity so that the system would not be overwhelmed in the event of a flare-up. But we're going to be working with governors tomorrow on the subject of testing and supplies. And as the President said again this evening, we're here to help. We forged a partnership with governors around the country, and tomorrow we'll be building on that partnership to hopefully arrive at the day that we can make sure governors around the nation have the best advice and the best resources to put America back to work. Thank you, Mr. President.
Very good. Seema, you've done such a great job. Please come up and say a couple of words. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, Mr. President. So just a few weeks ago, we stood here and asked the American healthcare system to delay elective surgeries and procedures. And the reason why we did this is we wanted to make sure that the healthcare system could deal with any surges. We wanted to preserve equipment, make sure that they had the appropriate workforce to handle any surge. And our healthcare system did a fantastic job. They very quickly stood up telehealth services, and under the President's leadership, we started paying for these services under the Medicare program. But the reality is not everything can be addressed by telehealth. There may be a woman that needs surgery for breast cancer, somebody who has cataracts in their eyes that need to be able to see better, and sometimes a doctor just needs to be able to listen to their patient's heart. We've heard across the country that doctors' offices have closed and many healthcare systems are furloughing their staff, nurses and doctors. Under the President's leadership, we've put out over $90 billion in accelerated payments under the Medicare program, provided $30 billion of grants with more dollars on the way. But thanks to the American people, we are in a much different place. You heard from the Vice President that there are many places.
Administrator Verma just highlighted that hospitals are looking to lay off staff. This sounds horrifying at a moment when we need more medical professionals than ever, but the problem is that hospitals are largely, public hospitals are paid for by the states, and the states get their money from taxes, which aren't being paid when everyone's unemployed. And so we have this terrifying cycle where the states are running out of money, and therefore the hospitals are running out of money, and the hospitals were running out of money because they were overwhelmed anyway. And that is why Democrats have said that in this effort to renew payment for the Paycheck Protection Plan for small businesses, there needs to be more money for hospitals and for state and local governments. But Republicans have said, no, if you want to give money to those groups, then we just won't give anybody money. And that is the holdup that we're at with the Paycheck Protection Plan.
Country and healthcare systems need to decide what services should be made available. And ultimately, doctors and patients need to make decisions about their health care services. And we want to make sure that systems are reopening so that they can stay open and doing that in a very measured way. And I want to thank all the healthcare workers on the front lines who have done a fantastic job in providing care and comfort, serving as a liaison between family members. They've done a fantastic job, and we owe a debt of gratitude to them. And to all those providers that did adhere to our guidelines. They did the right thing, and it has made an extraordinary difference. I also want to take a couple of seconds here to talk about our nursing homes. Our hearts and minds are with the patients and the families of those living in nursing homes. This is an extraordinarily difficult situation. People living in nursing homes are of the most vulnerable patients. They're elderly. Many of them have underlying health conditions. And this has been a very hard situation. And I really appreciate the strong efforts of governors and local communities that have shown great leadership in supporting nursing homes across the country, particularly Governor Baker, Governor Hogan, that have had special efforts around supporting nursing homes. FEMA is also working on a plan to make sure that nursing homes have the supplies that they need. And just last week, we increased the reimbursement in the Medicare program for high throughput tests. And we are also paying for labs to go out to nursing homes to collect samples. And that's going to really support efforts on nursing homes in order to isolate patients. Today we are also announcing, under the President's leadership, an effort around nursing home transparency. It's important that patients and their families have the information that they need, and they need to understand what's going on in the nursing home. And so today we are announcing that we are requiring nursing homes to report to patients and their families if there are cases of COVID virus inside the nursing home. We are also requiring nursing homes to report directly to the CDC when they have cases of COVID virus. And this is very important, as you've heard Dr. Birx talk about. As we reopen the United States, our surveillance effort around the COVID virus will also begin in nursing homes. And so by having this reporting system, this will support CDC's efforts to have surveillance around the country and to support efforts around contact tracing so that we can mitigate the spread of the virus in those communities that show spread starting in the nursing homes. So again, I want to thank all of the local officials that have done an amazing job in supporting the nursing homes, and would urge all state and local leaders to follow their lead and do everything that we can to keep nursing home residents safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Hahn is here. If you need, he'll tell you maybe a little bit later if you want this, but I can tell you that very simply, the level at which they're approving things, tests, and being on top of the people that are doing the testing for therapies and for vaccines they've never seen anything like this. So I want to thank you very much, and stick around. Maybe they'll have some questions. Okay? Please go ahead. In the back.
Mr. President, thank you very much. If there were groups of people planning to protest tomorrow against the government shutdown, what would be your advice?
Against the shutdown?
Yeah, that they want the shutdown lifted. Should they go ahead if it's in a state where there haven't been 14 days?
I don't have any risk. People feel that way. You're allowed to protest. I mean, they feel that way. I watched the protest, and they were all 6 feet apart. I mean, it was a very orderly group of people. But
we have released videos on these protests. You can look for yourselves. They are not standing 6 feet apart. These orderly protesters that the president is highlighting in Michigan actually blocked an ambulance from gaining access to a hospital. Moments ago, just moments earlier in this press conference, Vice President Pence urged Americans to follow the guidelines of their local and state officials, and now President Trump is voicing support for people acting out against those guidelines.
the term that was the only sentence they left out, which is okay. But I appreciate that that's what Governor Cuomo said. But they've done a phenomenal. These people have done a phenomenal job. As far as protesters, I see protesters for all sorts of things, and I'm with everybody. I'm with everybody. Please, in the back. Go ahead. In the back. Go ahead. You ready? Yeah.
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. President. Jen Pellegrino with OAN. Yesterday you pointed out that Iran was likely not truthful in the reporting of the virus. Meanwhile, Senator Dianne Feinstein and other Democrats are looking for $5 billion in aid to Iran. Are you considering giving any aid to Iran?
If Iran needed aid on this, I would be willing to do something if they want it, if they ask for it. I would be certainly willing. They were hit very hard. Obviously, those numbers weren't correct numbers that they reported. But if they needed help, if they needed aid, if they needed ventilators, we have thousands of ventilators currently on hand, and ventilators under construction, that are under construction. That's a mosquito. I don't like mosquitoes. I don't like mosquitoes at all. But if they, we would certainly be willing to help. What they should do is be smart and make a deal. It's only because of, you look at what happened. It's John Kerry, I guess, just doesn't want them to make a deal. And they're probably figuring they can wait, and maybe it will be.
So the president is talking about Iran. He frequently misrepresents the case. The fact is that we had a deal with Iran, which was working. All international experts agree that it was stopping Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, and that Iran is actually closer now as a result of the U.S. pulling out of the deal. Now, the new sanctions on Iran have indeed made the coronavirus there worse. Iran has suffered over 5,000 deaths, and Human Rights Watch has highlighted the fact that many nations are reluctant to contribute medical aid to Iran out of fear of running afoul of the U.S. sanctions.
An amendment, we can't allow that to happen. And that is indirectly related to this, because you know what's happened with guns. People are buying guns at a level that you haven't seen before because of this surge of plague. So what he did was totally inappropriate. Other than that, I'm not going to mention governors, but I have a...
So the president is attacking Governor Northam for signing into law a series of common sense gun reforms. The president is falsely suggesting that this was done because of the coronavirus. This actually appears to have been timed around the anniversary of the Virginia Tech shootings, and they are very common sense reforms that most Americans agree on. Universal background checks, which 92% of Americans support, a red flag provision, which the majority of Americans support, a limit on purchases so that you can't get more than one handgun a month, not so crazy, a fine for parents who leave their guns out where children can get at them, and a requirement that if your gun is stolen, you just tell the police, because there is now, by definition, another gun in the hands of a criminal.
That we don't think are in the best interests of the people of this country. We are very close to a deal. I can't tell you whether or not we're going to get the deal or not. Who would say that? You want me to say we're going to have a deal before we have a deal? We have a good chance of getting a deal. A lot of good discussions were had today. We have a good chance of getting the deal. We want the deal. We want to take care of our workers. We want to take care of our small companies. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question for you and also for Dr. Hahn, if I may, after I answer your question.
Sure.
In your remarks that you made just a few moments ago, in regards to reopening the U.S. economy, you said, I want it to be safe. And that's a sentiment obviously shared by tens of millions of Americans.
I want it to be safe.
And it seems at odds, Mr. President, with the tweet that you had on Friday about liberating those three particular states, Virginia, Minnesota, and Michigan, because none of those states, Mr. President, have met the requirements that the Vice President and others on the task force have talked about in terms of reopening the economy. Do you see those two
Well, if you take
odds?
Michigan, there were things in the Michigan that I don't think they were necessary or appropriate. Everyone knows that. I think the governor of Michigan, we're getting along very well, but I think the governor of Michigan probably knows that. I think she probably wished she didn't put some of them in. You can't buy paint, you can't buy seeds. Where did this stuff come from? No, we're going to be safe. We have to be safe. And we don't want to close anything. We're not going to be closing, but we're going to be doing it beautifully, systematically. We're working very well with the governor.
The president is seemingly just assembling words beautifully, wonderfully. He's attacking the governor of Michigan, whom he has called a half-wit, against whom he has suggested that his supporters should work to, quote, liberate the state. He is attacking the decision to close non-essential businesses there. Michigan has currently over 30,000 cases of the coronavirus and has suffered over 2,000 deaths. President Trump said just now that he imagines that the governor regrets the measures that she put in place to try to control the coronavirus. She said on the Sunday shows this morning that she has no regrets about closing anything because that was what was necessary to protect the citizens of her state. And then also just again on the gun issue, which is what led him to attack the governor of Virginia. I want to point out that tomorrow is the 21st anniversary of Columbine and that there have been at least 900 school shootings since then. This past March is the first March in years that there has not been a school shooting, and it is tragic that it takes a shutdown of schools to stop school shootings.
It's not doing so well, but they may open up parts. So we're going to do it very, very carefully, and I think it's going to be very successful. But when you say safe, I want it to be very safe.
Thank you very much.
Hey, let him just do this one then. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hahn.
Doctor?
There's a question that I don't know the answer to, and I was hoping that you could provide an answer to. There's an epidemiologist at the University of Alabama in Birmingham who's actually a COVID-19 survivor, and his name is Michael Say. And his question is this: why would the virus suddenly be different? And why would people's susceptibility be any different on May the 1st, or on June the 1st, or on July the 1st? And this all relates to reopening the economy. Can you explain or give an answer to that particular question?
I don't think we have evidence that one would be more susceptible or less. What I think we can say is that the mitigation efforts have really helped with respect to this, and that what we've seen is the number of cases have gone down. And if we follow the gating criteria for the opening, we're then able to institute phase one and have the appropriate measures in place to actually reduce any.
They keep using the phrase that the number of cases has gone down. This is not accurate. The acceleration of cases has slowed, but there were 30,000 new cases in the last 24 hours.
Dr. Birx talked about this at the podium, and the key here is the surveillance that is being put in place with the CDC. I think that'll be a really great help in terms of trying to reduce that risk. Thank you.
And I think they have the rest of that clip. I just thought it was a very good clip. I think it's a tribute to New York. I think it's a tribute to the federal government, and I thought it was nice. So I think they have that now. They can try it. Go ahead.
Wow. He is circling back to this out-of-context clip of Cuomo saying that the federal government did a good job of building the FEMA hospitals in the Javits Center and on the Comfort. That is true, and no one is denying that. Governor Cuomo has expressed repeated frustration with the federal government for failing to invoke the Defense Production Act that could have enabled New York and other states to have the medical supplies that they needed before they needed them. Governor Cuomo has repeatedly criticized the president for leaving governors to themselves to try to bid against each other for supplies. Also, that clip that he played was a different clip. It was not the rest of the clip that he played earlier, as he suggested.
Been told to us earlier and a lot sooner. People knew it was happening, and people did not want to talk about it. Many Americans are saying the exact same thing about you, that you should have warned them the virus was spreading like wildfire through the month of February instead of holding rallies with thousands of people. Why did you wait so long to warn them?
Who are you with?
And why did you not have social distancing until March 16th?
Who are you with?
I'm Weijia Jiang with CBS News.
So if you look at what I did in terms of cutting off or banning China from coming in.
Chinese nationals. But by the way, not Americans who are also
Nice and
coming
easy.
from China. Nice
and easy. Just relax.
I want you to note the way that President Trump talks to women journalists of color.
We had 21 people in a room. Everybody was against it but me.
That is not true. President Trump repeatedly falsely says that everyone in the room was against placing travel restrictions on China. Health and Human Services Secretary Azar has said that it was made in conjunction with all of his advisors who agreed with him.
And not even mentioned. It wasn't even mentioned, the Democrats. We were very early. Oh, I'm the president. And you know what I just did? And you know what I just...
And by the way, when you issued the ban, the virus was already here.
Okay, and you know how many people, when I issued the ban, how many cases of virus were in the United States when I issued the ban? Do you know the number? No, how many cases? Remember I said one person were here when I issued the ban? How many?
I did my research. On the 23rd of March, you said you knew this was going to be a pandemic.
Can I tell you what? I did know it. I did know it. All I have to do is look.
So you knew
Anybody knew it. Just, are you ready? How many cases were in the United States when I did my ban? How many people had died in the United States?
So do you acknowledge that you didn't think
Keep your voice down, please.
Spread?
Keep your voice down.
Did you not?
How many cases were in the United States? I did a ban where I'm closing up the entire country.
That is false. He did not do a ban or close off the entire country.
And yet I closed up the country, and I believe there were no deaths, 0 deaths at the time I closed up the country. Nobody was there. And you should say thank you very much for good judgment. Go ahead, please.
President, you just mentioned Germany. Germany is allowing small stores to open
Yes, they
tomorrow.
are. I just spoke to them.
Does this give you confidence that some European countries are on the mend of recovery?
So after President Trump just spread a series of falsehoods about his supposed China travel ban, I want to highlight 38 countries had travel restrictions on China earlier or at the same time. Most of those were more complete restrictions. His was not a total ban, as he suggested. It actually allowed some 40,000 people to continue to enter the U.S. from China after it went into effect. It came quite late, in that some 300,000 people had entered the country over the previous month from China. He falsely claimed that everyone was against it, but in fact the decision was made in accord with advisement from public health officials. HHS Secretary Alex Azar said at the time that it was made following the, quote, uniform recommendation of the career public health officials here at HHS. He was not criticized by either Democratic congressional leadership nor by Democratic candidates. Dr. Jennifer Nuzzo of Johns Hopkins says that we have not seen, quote, we have not seen any evidence that the travel restrictions stopped or slowed the transmission of the virus that causes COVID-19. And her reason for saying that is that, again, it came quite late, and it still allowed so many people in who were allowed in as loopholes through the ban. And most importantly, a ban of this sort would buy you time, and then it matters what you do with the time. And the president did not declare a national emergency until a month and a half later, did not invoke the Defense Production Act at any degree until nearly 2 months later, and now, in April, we still do not have a nationwide system for testing.
Has indeed praised a lot of what the federal government has done, but he...
No, excuse me. He didn't say a lot. He said we did a phenomenal job. He didn't say a lot. He didn't say you did a good job on ventilators but nothing else. No, he said we did a phenomenal job. So report accurately, because you are one of the most inaccurate reporters. Go ahead.
What he has said is that, and along with a bunch of Republican governors who've said what they need, though, is a national strategy when it comes to testing. Because on supplies, they say that they're competing against one another.
They said the same thing with ventilators, and now we have so many that we're going to be able to send them and help other countries that are in need. We're doing great on testing, and we are actually using the act, as you know, on a certain company.
But what about on the reagents? They say that that's something that they can't get.
We're in great shape. It's so easy to get. That reagents and swabs are so easy to get.
That is not what the governors say. Governors are saying that they cannot get the reagents and swabs that they need.
By computers, that's a different thing. And no, we'll have everything's going to be in very good shape very soon. We're going to be in very good shape very soon. Yeah, please go ahead.
President, just the latest stimulus package, will that have funding for...
So President Trump just said many false things there about testing. First of all, he suggested that when the reporter said President Cuomo has praised your response on some things and not others, he disputed that, suggesting that President Cuomo has had Governor Cuomo, excuse me, that was a little Freudian, that Governor Cuomo had nothing but praise for him. The fact of the matter is Governor Cuomo has been a very vocal critic of the fact that the president has made it too hard for governors to get what they need. He has also suggested that it is only Democratic governors who have been complaining. That is simply not true. Multiple Republican governors have been saying the same thing, that they cannot get what they need to perform these tests. And he said just now that it is very easy to get the swabs and the reagents. Nebraska's Republican Governor Pete Ricketts said that it has been, quote, a challenge to get the supplies needed to conduct the test. And a top Nebraska health official said, quote, we're trying to compete with those people, meaning the other states trying to get the supplies, and we're just not getting the reagents sent to us. The situation of getting supplies has been so dire that Governor Pritzker of Illinois made arrangements in secret to charter a private jet to fly supplies in from China because he feared that he would not be able to get them from the federal government, and that if the president found out he was importing them from China, that President Trump would confiscate them. So that is the actual state of the case in terms of governors trying to get what they need from this administration.
Down throughout the country, and hopefully they're going to be able to open up relatively quickly.
But the funds were specifically for small businesses. Would the administration...
Well, it depends
make sure
how the hotel is considered. Is it owned by a big chain? But even if it's owned by a big chain, that's devastating. If they have 200 hotels in the country and they're closed, and it's not only in the country. Remember this. This is all over the world. If they could have 2,000 hotels that are in other countries. They're also closed. We're in better shape than most. when you think about it. So I think
we are not in better shape than most countries in any respect, and most importantly, we account for 31% of the world's coronavirus cases and over a quarter of the global deaths.
Of more than 40,000 Americans now having died from the coronavirus. Can you explain then why you come out here and you are reading clips and showing clips of praise for you and for your administration? Is this really the time for self-congratulations?
Well, I will tell you this. What I'm doing is I'm standing up for the men and women that have done such an incredible job. Not for me, for the men and women, admirals, vice president, if I might, but all of the men and women, thousands, tens of thousands of them that built hospitals in New York and New Jersey and all over this country in record time. They throw up 1,000 beds in 4 days. I'm sticking up for those people. Those people have been incredible. I'm also sticking up for doctors and nurses and military doctors and nurses.
The president says he is sticking up for doctors and nurses. I want to remind you that until recently he was accusing doctors and nurses of stealing medical equipment from the hospitals and suggesting that that was why there was a shortage.
People,
40,000 Americans have now died.
Those people have been just absolutely excoriated by some of the fake news, like you, your CNN, your fake news. And let me just tell you, they were excoriated by people like you that don't know any better.
It is simply not true to say that the media has been attacking doctors and nurses. It is just simply not true.
If we didn't do a job...
The question is why now? Not why are you doing it,
I'll tell you
why
why now. Are you ready? Because these people are right now in hospitals. It's dangerous. It's going to a battlefield. And I want these people, I want you. I want you in the... It's all about that. It's not about me. No, nothing's about me. Look, you're never going to treat me fairly, many of you. And I understand that. I don't even know. I got here with the worst, most unfair press treatment, they say, in the history of the United States for a president. They did say Abraham Lincoln had very bad treatment, too. Let me just tell you.
It has your name in it. It talks about Trump remaking the playbook.
Well, that's a positive thing, because that's an exercise in how to do it and what to do. And
President Trump is claiming that this is not about him. He has, however, made it very clear that these are about him. He started Monday's briefing with a 4-minute clip from Fox News praising him. He spent 45 minutes rewriting the timeline of this disease. He has absolutely made this about him. It is also not true to say that there is any evidence that the press against him has been unfairly biased. The number of negative stories, the fact that there's a large number of negative stories does not make the negative stories less true.
We're tracking at much less than the lowest possible estimate. And that's a great tribute to a number of people and a number of things. One of the things that it's a tribute to is what's taken place in this country with the American people. Because they've gone inside, they've done it. They've done a job that nobody thought was possible. And in fact, when they did the models, as they call them, nobody thought it was possible. They did models not based on this kind of success. I've seen New York streets, and I see it in the morning. I've watched all my life New York streets, and you can't even see the pavement. There's so many people. And you take a look this morning, you take a look, even on Friday morning, I looked at it, I saw it through a camera. There wasn't a person on Fifth Avenue, there wasn't a person on Madison Avenue. I've never seen anything like it, because people have really listened to instructions, and they've listened to what we've had to say, and the professionals, they've listened. And those people should really give them a lot of credit, including people like you, because you just don't have the sense to understand what's going on. All right. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Should publicly traded companies like Shake Shack and Quantum Corp and Ruth's Chris, should they have access to the PPP program?
Well, it would depend. It would depend. A lot of those, I don't know much about any of those companies, but a lot of times they're owned by franchisees where they own one or two places, and, you know, they are small businesses. So a lot of that would depend on what the formula is. But again, many of those companies are, you know, they're out to franchisees. A franchisee could open up one of the places that you mentioned. And so, yeah, I would say that's important, actually. That's like a restaurant. Go ahead, please.
You know, these you referred to these protests earlier. You know, some of them are getting pretty intense, and we're actually getting some death threats to some governors who are reluctant.
You are in the media?
No, the governors are getting death threats. Now, governors of Kentucky, Michigan, Virginia, they're getting increased levels of death threats. And are you concerned that you're talking about liberation and the Second Amendment and all this stuff? Are you inciting violence among the few people?
I've seen the people. I've seen interviews of the people. These are great people. Look, they want to get, they call cabin fever. You've heard the term? They've got cabin fever. They want to get back. They want their life back. Their life was taken away from them. And, you know, they learned a lot during this period. They learned to do things differently than they have in the past. And
so this is really striking. Just moments ago, President Trump was praising the fact that there were people not out on the streets of New York, saying that it is a testament to how well Americans are doing, that they are following the guidelines of their elected officials to stay inside. And now he is praising the very protesters who took to the streets and defied social distancing guidelines in many states and caused a danger to public health in the process.
No way. But I didn't see that. I see all, of course, I'm sure the news plays that up. I've seen American flags all over the place. I have never seen so many American flags at a rally as I have at these rallies. These people love our country. They want to get back to work. Please, go ahead.
Have you thought any more about pardoning Paul Manafort or Roger Stone so they're not exposed to coronavirus in jail?
Well, I just tell you this. Roger Stone was treated very unfairly. Paul Manafort, the Black Book, turned out to be a fraud. We learned that out during the various last number of weeks and months. They had a Black Book that came out of Ukraine, turned out to be a fraud. Turned out to be a fraud. They convicted a man, turned out to be a fraud. General Flynn was a highly respected person, and it turned out to be a scam on him. The FBI said he didn't lie, and Mueller's people wanted him to go to jail. Okay? So what am I going to do? You'll find out what I'm going to do. I'm not going to say what I'm going to do, but I will tell you the whole thing turned out to be a scam.
This is not true. President Trump is maintaining that his convicted felons who worked on his campaign in many cases confessed to the crimes that they committed, that it was a scam. That is not the case. Paul Manafort, Michael Flynn, Michael Cohen all broke the law. Also, President Trump is highlighting the patriotism of the people at these pro-coronavirus rallies. I'm going to call them that. Pro-coronavirus rallies, the Americans who were waving American flags there. He's not talking about the Americans who were waving swastikas there, which was indeed also part of the demonstration.
People, these are bad people. These are very dangerous people. You know what they are, though? They're scum. They're human scum. All right, do you want to have one in the back, please?
Thank you, Mr. President. The CDC has finally admitted to profound failures with testing kits from the beginning of the outbreak. Is this a function of lax oversight from the Obama-Biden administration?
Well, it's not from me. I mean, they came in and they had some problems early on, but we've straightened it out. But yeah, look, I told you we inherited a lot of garbage. We took, they had tests that were no good. They had, all the stuff was no good. Came from
this is a ridiculous claim to suggest that he inherited faulty coronavirus tests from the Obama administration. The coronavirus did not exist during the Obama administration. It is called COVID-19 because it came into existence in 2019. The fact of the matter is that what he inherited was a global health security unit within the National Security Council, and he fired that. He inherited a 69-page pandemic response playbook, and he discarded that. He did not inherit a broken system. He inherited a system that he broke. And also, I want to highlight that he is calling the head of the FBI scum. This is a man who claims to be supporting law enforcement, and it is a shocking thing for a president of the United States to say about the head of the FBI.
pressure is, you know, they had to do this under pressure. So we're very proud of the job they've done. Please, go ahead.
Mr. President, you said swabs are easy, and this has been something that hospitals and states have been saying there are shortages for more than a month now. Why wait till use the Defense Production Act until now?
Well, we already have millions coming in. We have one company that we're forced to use it with, and probably by tomorrow we won't be. You know, it's a tremendous hammer. Probably by tomorrow it won't be, but we have millions of them coming in. They're very easy. By comparison, and in all fairness, governors could get them themselves. They really could. All of this, but we're going to do it. We're going to work with the governors, and if they can't do it, we're going to do it.
So the president is misrepresenting the availability of swabs to governors. You can't perform these tests without the swabs. As I mentioned, the Republican governor of Nebraska has said that it has been a challenge to get them. The Republican governor of Ohio has said that he has not been able to get them. The Republican governor of Wyoming has complained. The Republican governor of Maryland has said that it is absolutely false, quote, that states have enough testing. It is also Democrats as well. Governor Phil Murphy has said that no
That he was doing a great job.
Made it. You and the Obama administration. By China.
China was charging the U.S. too little for goods. Now, President Trump, probably what he's saying right now while he's waving his hands around is that China is now paying tariffs to the U.S. Again, that is false. That is a repeated lie by this administration. That is not how tariffs work. The tariffs are paid by American.
Very happy. I was very happy. I hope they were happy. Billions of dollars came in tariffs. Billions of dollars. They're going to be purchasing billions. And then all of a sudden, long after that, I find out about this. And I told you, I'm not, listen, CNN, listen, CNN. I told you I'm not happy about it. And this was after the deal. So we have this wonderful deal. And I was nobody's been tougher before the deal ever on China than Trump. Then I made a deal. I was very happy with the deal. It's a great deal, great for our farmers. The farmers have been paid a fortune. Then what happened? No mistake. We made a great deal. Now I find out after the deal, after the deal, I find out that I'm not happy. You people are so pathetic at CNN. Let me just tell you. Sure. Then we find out about the plague, right? The plague. And since we found out about that, I'm not happy. But I closed it up long before Pelosi. Listen, long before Pelosi, she was having parties in San Francisco. Let's all go to Chinatown. And that was a long time after I closed
Chinatown and parties.
Because you're pathetic. Go ahead, let's go. Your ratings are terrible. You got to get back to real news. Go ahead.
The first of the month is next week. So for people that are worried about whether or not they're going to see a stimulus check again next month, will there be another stimulus check?
Well, we're looking at it. We're talking about it. It's the... We will let you know when it's appropriate, but we're not going to let our people suffer. And you've seen that. By the way, you've seen better than anyone. And you people have actually covered it within, okay. But you've seen what's going on. Nobody else could have done it. Nobody else could have done it. And I'm very happy if we get this new check out to the, well, essentially to the workers in these small businesses, the PPP, we are going to be, we're going to be very happy.
So the coronavirus relief checks, this is not true. They were promised to have been delivered this week, but they have not all. Or have the physical checks been mailed? The physical checks are being delayed because President Trump's name.
Nation right now.
Just in terms of just the supply chain, as companies here.
Yeah, we're doing the supply chain. It's not going to affect trade. That's part of trade, and it's not going to affect trade. And if it does, supply chain based in Mexico or Canada interrupts with our making a big, we're not going to be happy. Let me tell you that. Go ahead, one or two more. Go ahead in the back.
Thank you very much.
Who are you with?
I'm with the Salt Lake Tribune. Thank you, sir. On Thursday, the White House announced a congressional task force on reopening America. It included every Republican senator but Mitt Romney.
Which one were you talking about? The UK?
You mean some of the ones that didn't do well? I don't say that, but you just have to look. And some of them just got hit hard. When I closed up our border, when I did the ban on China, they say a lot of the people that didn't come in here went to Italy. You heard that. That's why Italy was hit so hard. I don't think it was because of government. I will say Italy is locked down probably more than any other country right now. It's just absolutely locked solid down. But they got hit very hard because people that were coming to the United States couldn't come because I closed the country in January, and they went to Italy, they say. It had to do with trade. It had to do with the purchase of certain materials, and Italy was another alternative. And so many, many people went to Italy instead of coming here, and Italy has suffered greatly. Now, I spoke with the Prime Minister a lot. He's a great friend of mine, and what's happened to Italy is very, very tough. Thank you all very much. We appreciate it. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Well, that was really something. So that was the end of a very tense press briefing. President Obama, that is me. Oh dear. Not hearing from me. So, okay. All right, I lost the signal there for a moment. Back. That was an extremely tense briefing from President Trump, where he, quite frankly, lost his... It was a difficult thing to watch at times. There were a lot of check in real time, in part because of the poor internet signal here in my apartment. But I want to thank you for joining us. I'm Alan Piper, and I had the support of our team today working remotely, particularly Bianca Clenenden. On a personal note, I want to say that as your fact check, living in New York City, where we've lost more than 13,000 of our citizens. We're just up the street from me. There have been the overflow of dead bodies. I find it painful when the president calls the ridiculous for asking for the medical equipment that is necessary to save the lives of people in their states. More than 40... The Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation says that 90% of those deaths could have been earlier. Many of you have lost someone you care about already. And if you haven't yet, it's almost... And I am so sorry for you and for all of us. To everyone out there, check in on the people you care about, and please let the people you love know how much you love them. Thank you, and good night.